It's Wednesday, June 28th, and you're watching CT Pulse on the HAN Network. I'm Kate Chaplinsky, happy to be joined again this week by our editorial director, John Kovach. And today we're going to be talking state budget gridlock. State Senator Tony Hwang going to be joining us just a little later in the show to give us his take on what's happening up in Hartford. Now, John, there's no state budget, but there's also no budget in the town of Stratford. Now, this has been an interesting story. You used to cover Stratford as well as an editor.
Remarkably partisan town, and I think the common theme that you'll see go through today is partisan problems. That you get to a national level and the parties not wanting to work together, and it filters down, and that's where I think a lot of the problem does lie. Stratford has for years had instances where they could have moved forward on things, but nobody really wanted to because the other guys were in control then. And now they're at a point where they don't have a spending plan, and they're having a special meeting Monday morning because they need to have some kind of a mill rate.
Right. So I know Melvin Mason, editor of the Stratford Star, is going to be there on Monday morning. They have to make appropriations in order for there to be enough money to kind of pay the bills, because they're going to be operating with this prior year's budget, this year's budget, bringing that over. Now, John, there was a budget approved by the town council, and then the mayor vetoed it.
Twice.
Sorry, I forgot there were two times. And, I guess the mayor's issue was that he didn't think there was enough funding for the schools in there. He thought that it kind of broke some rules and defunded areas of town hall that couldn't be contractually underfunded. So kind of interesting there. It's been quite a year in Stratford budget.
If it's being used as a political theater to set the stage for this fall's mayoral election, in which John Harkins has already announced he's not going to seek another term, then I think it's really setting the stage for what is going to be a fascinating, almost to the point of troubling, campaign going into November.
It's kind of interesting. You mentioned that. Stratford Mayor John Harkins not running for re-election. Governor Dana Malloy not running for re-election. No. So it's interesting to see maybe if that changes some of their actions a little bit in these budget processes. Maybe they're more not so worried about getting re-elected, kind of going out there and maybe more telling it like it is in their opinion. I don't know.
That might be it.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I think that train of thought might get a lot of people, and I'm not picking a side on this, but might get a lot of people to wish that politicians made every decision not based on whether they're running and whether they want to get elected again, but based on what they thought was right for that situation.
Yeah, and I know Melvin Mason, as we said, is going to be covering that on Monday. Poor guy has to work on a day that the rest of us will be off, but that should be interesting.
But their meetings only average 4 or 5 hours a clip. They'll be fine.
Yeah, totally not a big deal. So you can follow StratfordStar.com for the latest on that. Now, another story we wanted to talk about before we bring in State Senator Tony Hwang. This was interesting. Our own New Canaan Advertiser reporting that a school board member in New Canaan not understanding why a punishment handed down to some athletes who were involved in an underage drinking party is different than the policy that parents actually and athletes sign each year. So the policy is if students are involved in that type of behavior and they get in trouble for it, they would go to game practices if they're athletes, but they would not play in the games. Now, members of the baseball team were involved allegedly in an underage drinking party, but instead they were offered the option to do a diversionary program. Now, Athletic Director Jay Egan he defended that choice, saying in part, in 13 years as an athletic director, I've tried on numerous occasions suspending athletes from games, sometimes very important games, but it hasn't changed behavior. I just thought this was an interesting discussion.
If you have a policy, it's probably best to abide by it. However, having more than 20 years of experience as a coach, 16 of it in high school, I've also seen such instances. And the suspension, I a little bit agree with Jay Egan that it might not work. It often doesn't. I've seen top athletes suspended and you think it sends a lesson to their peers, and then 2 weeks later you're suspending another player for the exact same thing, and then 3 weeks after that you're suspending another player for the exact same thing. The other thing you have to think about is these kids are at a very you're at a balance point with that, and which way are they going to go sometimes. Sometimes the best thing is for them to be in a supervised situation after school and not forced away from something where they feel they belong. I don't know where I come down on this,
Right.
because it's a policy, so you probably should enforce it, but maybe it's a policy that needs to be looked at.
Right. Maybe perhaps it should be changed. I do think it's interesting, this board member, Maria Naughton, bringing up, parents and athletes, they sign this policy each year. So why all of a sudden change it now? This was an incident we talked about on CT Pulse in the past and Coffee Break, because a student was actually injured at this party, and a father and son actually ended up being arrested in connection with that. The father for allegedly not calling 911 for that student.
Yeah, I was surprised at the time that there wasn't such as suspensions, because I've seen them from my time as editor in New Canaan. See, we do enough towns, and I've edited there at some point. But in all seriousness, I've seen it there, and I've seen the debates and discussions as well. I think if you're not, if you're going to have parents and athletes sign a policy, you need to explain. And I had no idea this diversionary program was an option.
Right. So the diversionary program has been an option when a teen gets arrested for, say, permitting a minor to possess alcohol, So then the police created this program that they offer to students, and often it's taken, which is a good thing. This is the first time I think we've heard about it being offered to students that maybe weren't charged in any way, but just kind of through the school it being offered. So
I think the presence of the program in and of itself is a good thing, because there's a lot of times it's just you need to intervene here.
Right.
So.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting story. There's more on it at ncadvertiser.com. But John, we are going to take a break, and we're excited when we come back to welcome State Senator Tony Wong. He's going to be talking about the state budget process coming up on CT Pulse after this.
At In Sports Trumbull, the game is always on inside. Registration is now open for our fitness training programs for high school athletes. The In Sports Performance Center is offering blast speed classes, athletic functional movement assessments, and both men's and women's elite speed and strength training. Our premier programs help bring athletes to the next level. Call 203-268-1214 for more information. Like and follow us on Facebook.
Celebrate summer with fresh, made-to-order picnic boxes from Walter Stewart's Market. We have delicious summery selections from buttermilk fried chicken to grilled lemon chicken kebab, grilled shrimp Caesar salad wraps, or lobster salad rolls. Our easy-to-carry picnic boxes come with your choice of a meal, as well as a dessert, beverage, and utensils. Order online for simple pickup options. Walter Stewart's Market, 229 Elm Street, New Canaan, and online at stewartsmarket.com.
You don't have to go far for authentic Neapolitan cuisine and renowned wood-fire pizza. Pizzeria Loretano of Bethel is a contemporary Italian bistro, specializing in authentic wood-fired brick-oven pizza Napolitana. Pizzeria Loretano was named one of America's top 1,000 Italian restaurants in 2008 by Zagat, and recommended by Jane and Michael Stern on National Public Radio's Splendid Table. Located close to the Bethel Cinema, we focus on quality, and our food is always made to order. Join us for live jazz Sundays from 6 to 8. Find our schedule, menu, and more at pizzerialoretano.com, and like us on Facebook. If you've ever thought about owning a motor coach or learning about what it's like to travel the open road in superior style and comfort, then contact Dave's RV Center in Danbury, Connecticut. Offering the best quality Class A motorhomes from Newmar, travel trailers and fifth wheel lines from Surveyor, and a toy hauler line from Work and Play. Choose from Newmar's Gas Line, Baystar and Canyon Star, or from Newmar's Diesel Line, Ventana and Dutch Star. And with unparalleled service and maintenance, Dave's RV is committed to keeping you and your motor coach safely on the road and enjoying it to the fullest. Stop by their showroom, 2 Industrial Plaza Road, Danbury, Connecticut, or call 877-483-3866.
I can't believe it.
Well, Dad, you did it. You sold 160 cars. Ready to go back upstairs now?
I think it's time. I wonder how the boys are making out in their new office. Not what I had in mind, Kyle. What, Dad?
Maybe we should retire. Right now, lease a 2017 Rogue S for only $139 a month.
Isn't it time you got Millerized?
I'm Tracy Masella, a licensed clinical social worker at Silver Hill Hospital in New Canaan. Join me each month as we talk with experts on the front lines of the treatment of mental health and addiction. Straight Talk with Tracy, a Silver Hill Hospital production, airs at 12 p.m. on the second Thursday of each month here on the HAN Network.
Welcome back to CT Pulse on the HAN Network. I'm Kate Chaplinsky with John Kovach, and the fiscal year starts July 1st, and it would appear that the state of Connecticut is entering into that new year without a budget. CT News Junkie reported yesterday Democrats in the legislature weren't able to come up with a 2-year budget deal to close the $5.1 billion budget deficit. House Speaker Joe Arasimowicz said he's not interested in approving a temporary budget solution. However, he's also not interested in signing on to Governor Daniel P. Malloy's so-called mini-budget that would help fund government services for about 90 days until legislative leaders can reach a 2-year budget deal. Well, here to give us his perspective as a legislator is State Senator Tony Wong. He represents Easton, Fairfield, Weston, and Westport. Had him on the show before. Tony, we're so happy to have you back.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and part of the message is to keep people up to date on what's happening. And what's fascinating is the fact that in the past, what happens in Washington, what happens in Hartford, is pretty much kept out of your everyday life. People hate the aspect of politics.
Right.
And unfortunately, the legislative body didn't do their job this year. When we went in for a 2-year term in January, our first and foremost, single most priority project is to craft a budget. It was made a little bit more difficult in light of a $5 billion deficit of a $40 billion 2-year budget. That's tough. Those are numbers that are very challenging. And with declining revenue, it makes it even tougher. But what came out of that premise of a declining revenue and increased needs is the fact that we cannot afford to tax our residents any further. In the heels of 2 of the highest record tax increase budgets that's crafted by Governor Malloy, we still do not have enough money to keep basic governmental services. So that's the challenge we have. But fast forward 6 months later. We have a new calendar year starting July 1st, and we don't have a budget. What does that mean? What that means is the fact that our municipalities that have to plan out their conveyance taxes and motor vehicle taxes and property taxes and get a portion of their funding and operational costs from the state is held in limbo. Our education budgets that have been impacted by sweeps, the education formula, is held in limbo. The fact that our nonprofits that provide such critical services for those that are most at risk and vulnerable in our community, which is the sole purpose of government in some cases, is held in limbo. And the fact that our hospitals, who provide critical healthcare services, are looking at taxes and implications of how they run their business. The entire state is held in limbo because the legislative body did not do their job. Now, we were supposed to go into session tomorrow.
Yes.
And the idea was either to craft a resolution or, quote, a mini budget that would put into place some of the issues and some of the challenges to be met and create kind of a model moving forward. But what happened was the legislative rule says the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate both have to sign off on the emergency certification. Senator Looney has worked very closely with Senator Fasano in our Senate because of the 1818 tie. And we have crafted a budget from the Senate Republican side that is line by line and shows some of the challenges we were able to undertake. And it isn't a perfect model. It isn't a perfect budget, but it is something which we were willing to stand by. The governor proposed a budget in February in which everyone derailed. And it increased taxes on our hospitals, it restricted municipal aid, it cut educational funding in our communities. It was everything that nobody liked, right? Here's the reality. The Democratic legislative body has not provided a line-by-line budget. So how do you get to a budget when all 3 sides have incomplete details? It's comparing apples to oranges. So the reality is the Speaker decided to not sign the emergency certification. So as a result, we can't even go into session to debate the business at hand. That is incredibly frustrating. And I respect and understand their complexities to his decision making, but we have one job as legislators, and that is to enact a budget and to work from day one to resolve it. To not do so is, in my opinion, a dereliction of duty. And saying that, I think there's still hope. We have till Friday. Perhaps we can get called into session and we can craft some resolution to guide some of the principles that we initiated in our budget discussions to protect those that are most vulnerable, protect municipal aid, and protect our education funding.
Let's say that doesn't happen. What happens what do the residents of Connecticut experience starting Saturday?
Well, I think it's looking more and more like it's going to happen, is without a legislative session, without crafting a resolution or a mini budget, the authority goes to the governor. And the governor has issued an executive order in anticipation of what may happen on July 1st without a budget. And truly, people need to fully understand what that means. It means that virtually our nonprofits would be stripped of any funding, that our education formula that would have been implemented in a much more equitable basis would eviscerate, and that we would look at reduced municipal funding from the Pequot Fund. So it is used by many people. It is an executive order and a way of doing business that is draconian. And what's really my sensitivity is we didn't do our job. So as a result, the people that are most dependent, most at risk, would suffer the most. The state of Connecticut has great pride in providing some of the most quality, caring nonprofit services for those that are in need and at risk. It was built up over 40 to 50 years of tremendous community engagement and participation and government support. By one stroke of a pen, we could eviscerate and permanently damage those programs. We can't afford to do that. So again, I implore my colleagues, I stand ready to go back to work, because that is what we've been elected to do, to be their voice, to enact something that is a model moving forward, not just a Band-Aid. People need to remember that the past two budgets that have been passed by the Malloy administration was crafted solely with a Democratic majority, without Republican input. What you saw in this year's election was that an 18-18 tie in the Senate and a 4-seat differential in the House has created a scenario where people have both parties involved in the conversation, that there are budget consequences of not raising taxes, of cutting our spending, that has a little bit more resonance. That's why we don't have a budget, because the legislative majority cannot stampede a budget through without representing the interests of the people. So this delay is a reflection of a moving tone, a moving shift of our state to say we can't afford to tax and spend so much, but we still don't have the will to put that into action. And that's where we are at. Because the fact is, the past two budget that was passed by the Democratic majority and the governor alone they had so many holes in it, it began leaking like the Titanic. People need to remember the past two budgets have required us as a legislative body to go in and fix. I believe the last budget that was passed, that was some of the architects said was one of the best budgets they've ever put together. I think we had to go in 4 or 5 times to resolve the declining and unrealistic measures of revenue to our spending. So I believe if there's any optimism, is the fact that in us not having a budget could result in having something that is much more real, much more sensitive to the real challenges and climate that we have. But nonetheless, we have to meet a deadline, and we're not doing that right now.
Now, Tony, talking about the Republican budget proposal, I know Governor Malloy's talked about it, and he said in some cases it would be illegal because it would violate some collective bargaining agreements. He's also talked about maybe potentially reaching some concessions with some of the unions this week. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think the reality is we have a product that line by line that people can dissect, people can engage in debate. We don't even have one from the Democrats. Well, at least the governor can say that because he presented one, even though no one liked it. You have the credibility to engage in dialogue. So let's get to that point. Let's address the union concerns, right? The governor, in his efforts, negotiated a $1.6 billion concession package for the next 2 budget years. The first year he was looking at $700 million. But let's look at the numbers where we disagree. The governor, in that $700 million, the first $400 million were salary increases that were expected to take effect. Is that a real saving? It's that kind of accounting that we say, if you're getting a 6% increase, we cut it to 3, we cut 3%. That's not reality. So we addressed that issue. We looked at some of the aspect where legislative input, legislative impact, and how we govern and run our state government needs to be reiterated, needs to be reintroduced. The fact that we have not voted on labor contracts, which befits the large benefits, pension, and health, and all the various niceties of being a state employee. And they're hardworking people, with all due respect. But still, if you were to compare apples to apples to the benefits package that they have in vacation time, health benefits, with virtually zero deductible, compared to private sectors, compared to private unions, even compared to the teachers' unions, it is a largesse that we cannot afford. But the fact is, I blame the legislative body because we have not exerted our role. Just as we've not done a budget this year, we've not voted on a labor contract in over 20 years.
I was going to bring that up. Is that something that needs to be back in play?
Without a doubt. The fact is, by statute on municipal as well as state, if agreements are reached and it is not acted on by the duly appointed legislative body, after 30 days it goes into effect. This has happened for over 20 years. And the other issue that we can look at structural changes is the fact when we implemented the income tax over 25 plus years ago, in exchange for that was where the voter says we don't trust the legislative governing bodies. So let's have a spending cap so that you do not exceed your spending. And that was overwhelmingly voted by public referendum, statewide, in which nearly 75% of people voted for it, which I believe 2 years ago we found out that it was never enforceable because the legislative body never codified it. So our reaction as a Senate Republican is, let's vote on it. Let's reaffirm the will of the people to show respect and discipline. Haven't done it yet. So there's structural changes that we can act on. Vote on every labor contract. Enforce and codify a spending cap. And a whole host of other things to bring more parity to our workforce and to modernize our social services as well as critical government deliveries. Look, if people say government's working, all you need to do is to go to the DMV. Right? And my point is, we can make it better if we have the will to lead. And right now, the status quo is what's going on.
Well, I think you can make it better if there's a willingness to change. And what I'm sensing is there's no willingness to change. We're told annually that the deficit continues to grow, the deficit that we enacted an income tax 20-some years ago to erase, that there's no willingness to change, that status quo, we're going to maintain status quo even if it means building that deficit.
Well, I can't speak for that because I know for me, my basic tenet has always been in the heel of 2 record tax increases under the Malloy administration and the budgets. I don't think the state of Connecticut has a revenue problem. It has a spending discipline problem.
Yes.
But saying that, the resultant denial of making those changes has resulted in a revenue decline problem. But saying that, us not having a budget right now is a reflection that there are Democrats who feel the time for change is now. The crisis is at hand. We can no longer tax and spend. But the problem is the institutional leadership is unwilling to roll the dice and make fundamental changes. But saying that, I believe the state of Connecticut, Democrats and Republican, believe in working together to find a solution. We may have variances, but it's nothing like what's going on in Washington. At least we get along when we talk to each other and we engage. I respect my colleagues because, look, it's a part-time legislative body, and we're certainly not making a living doing it. We do it because we love our community, and as I say, we put in some incredible hours, the incredible challenges, thousands of emails, but you will never, ever hear me complain, because that's what I ran for. And to be a voice up there, to be able to articulate and represent the interests of the people that elected me, it's one of the greatest privileges I have. Of course, with my wife's support and approval.
Of course.
course.
Yeah. Tony, before we take a break, I just want to ask, you mentioned that Republicans were able to pick up some seats. Now, in the past, you maybe weren't at the table when it came to budget discussions. Is there more pressure now on the Republican Party because you have to take more accountability in the budget process since you were able to pick up those seats?
Without a doubt, governing and leadership requires challenges and standing forward. That's why we presented a budget that has been fiscally reviewed, that has brought up some challenges and changing the playbook of asking the unions for increased shared sacrifice, to ask to change fundamental structures in governing, and ask some of the municipalities to make challenges. Some of the arguments have been energy efficiency programs, stretching out ECS funding reallocation. Those are things that are tough decisions to make. We're willing to make it, and it's written in black and white so people can look at it and critique it. That is the burden of leadership. We've done it, and we're willing to do that. And because we believe, as Senate Republicans, there is a pathway, but it has to be done with shared sacrifice. And for the Senate and the House Democrats not to have a budget is frustrating. It's beyond frustrating because there is no comparative document to get to an answer.
All right, well, Tony, we're going to keep you around. We're just going to take a quick break. We have a lot more to talk about with State Senator Tony Wong coming up after this.
Did you know heart attacks and strokes are the leading cause of death in America? Protect the health of you and your loved ones. Talk to a doctor about heart disease. Hi, I'm Dr. David Pazer with ProHealth Physicians, encouraging you to stay informed about health matters that affect you.
ProHealth Physicians is on the pulse of social media to share information about health and nutrition with the community. Get up-to-the-minute alerts, including ProHealth Physicians news and upcoming events. Connecticut's leading group of primary care doctors is just a click away.
Part of banking well is doing good. That's why, with the support of local community partners, Bankwell has launched the Bankwell Pet Adoption Project to boost awareness about the hundreds of animals in local shelters that need a home. And when you donate to the cause using the Bankwell self-service coin machines, we'll match your donation. For details, visit mybankwell.com/pleaseadoptme. Bank smart, bank local, bank well.
Want a new experience in car buying? No aggravation, no confrontation, just answers to all your questions. Scap Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram. Car buying the way you want it to be. With one of the largest selections of new 2- and 4-door Jeep Wranglers available, we are Connecticut's Wrangler headquarters. Located in Fairfield, Connecticut, we're easy to get to. Just 2.5 miles off the Merritt Parkway, exit 44 via Route 58 South. Save thousands right now during the Drive and Discover event. Now through June 30th.
School's out, the weather is hot, and the fish are biting. Whether you're heading to the beach or out on a boat, stop in at the dock shop before you go to fill your beach bag or tackle box with everything you'll need for fun in the sun. A new beach cover-up, some sunscreen, or just some bait, the dock shop has you covered from either location. 51 Tokenique Road, Darien, 609 Riverside Avenue, Westport. And yes, you heard that right. Bait is now available in Darien and Westport. The Dock Shop, 51 Tokenique Road, Darien, 609 Riverside Avenue, Westport. DockShop.com.
If you're watching this broadcast, you're not alone. The HAN network is available for 200,000 Connecticut cable customers on the Frontier network, and we've also reached more than 2 million viewers on our free live streaming sports, news, and entertainment broadcasts. To reach our rapidly growing audience, contact Advertising Director Jessica Murrin at 203-273-7312 or email jessica@han.network.
Welcome back to CT Pulse on the HAN Network. Kate Czaplinski, John Kovach, joined by State Senator Tony Wong, and we're talking about the state budget process. Now, Tony, what have you been hearing from the towns you represent, from those municipal leaders?
they're beyond frustrated. They're held in limbo. Legislative leaders in our municipalities, educational leaders, nonprofit leaders that are the very fabric of our local communities that we see up and down Main Street. They don't know how to manage their property taxes. They don't know how to manage their motor vehicle taxes. They just don't know what services and requirements are met. And then you look at our educational institutions in some of our communities, their state funding has been stripped to zero, and how that affects their ability to plan. And then you look at our nonprofits. If we went with the governor's executive order, the money that was supposed to be allocated becomes zero. How do you care for the need that still exists? And our hospitals, critical hospital partners, are looking to get taxed on care that they have to provide. So it really is frustrating. But again, going back, we had 6 months, thousands of hours of public hearing. To not have a line-by-line document shows that we have not had the courage to stand behind. And that's been the frustrating part. If we had 3 documents in which we can all compare notes, then you can break out what is valid, what is not, what is appropriate, what is not, and make the decision. Right now, we're negotiating with a ghost. And that's frustrating. And the municipalities look to the state for leadership, and we're in limbo. All of our towns have run their budget.
Right.
They've run their budget.
Well, not all.
Except Stratford. They're having a little trouble. We talked about that earlier.
Right.
But yes, for the most part, they're all approved.
And some of the towns, because of our willingness to explore expanding the deadline, here's the reality. Deadlines are there for a reason. You have to have the discipline and the professionalism to do your job. We've not done our job, and as a result, the trickle-down effect is unfortunately going to impact our communities. And that's why this budget crisis and this budget limbo has mattered so much for people, because for the first time, as much as they hate politics, as much as they don't want to deal with Hartford and Washington, what's happening is impacting their real lives, their education, their health care, their ability to pay their property taxes and stay and be a vibrant part of community that they love. It's threatening all of that.
And what else stands out to you in this 2017 legislative session, good or bad, that comes to mind?
Well, I think the balance of power really increased dialogue, and that's been so much welcome because as chair of housing, we were able to implement some real balanced and bipartisan synergy, where we talked about policy changes that didn't just benefit one segment of the population or one area of the state. We looked at a broader basis. That kind of synergy was fabulous. And I would compliment my co-chairs in that, in making it work. And the other part was really talking about how we have to govern, looking at structural changes. But old habits die hard, and we're still stuck with the old habits. But at least, we're not simply going with the status quo like we did in the past 2 budget processes. We're having real struggles and dialogues. That's important. But there are a lot of things that are happening that we have to have impact and input on, and one of which is the incredible healthcare insurance cost that is escalating in our state. All the conversation you hear right now is about the federal government in regards to Affordable Care Act and the latest iteration of healthcare reform. And I have to be honest with you, they're both doing an incredible disservice to the people they represent, because the lack of transparency, the lack of predictability, the lack of true openness of recognizing that these changes have significant consequences, impacting close to a sixth of our state, our federal economy, but most important of all, it's impacting my health and my loved ones' health and yours. It's something we can't ever take lightly, but it's happening in our state level as well, and it's not getting the coverage. Anthem just requested a 33.8% rate increase in May. And the fact it is compounded by cumulative increase in recent years of over 100%. These rates have become unsustainable, unaffordable, and it is hurting people in their ability to pay their mortgages, to pay for tuitions, to really how to make ends meet. Because healthcare insurance is not a luxury, in my opinion. It is one that you prepare and care to protect your loved ones and your better health. The fact is, we have an uncontrolled system. The reality is, both sides in creating an affordable care program has created a system that is anything but affordable. But I'm not just picking on insurance companies. They deserve part of the blame. But we have to understand and evaluate that our healthcare cost is one of the highest in the world. Even though we have the best quality care, most consumers don't fully understand. So when we look at healthcare cost containment, we not only have to look at insurance companies, we have to look at our hospitals, we have to look at tort reform, we have to look at doctors' utilization, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, Medicaid, Medicare disbursement, home care. It is a whole ecosystem of healthcare costs that we need to control better, or at least understand better. So when you look at the healthcare formula, it can't be done overnight. It can't be done in a room with 10 other people. It impacts everyone, and unfortunately, it needs to be taken care of, and we're not doing it in a truly open, transparent, and bipartisan way. And that's frustrating, but people need to say, right now, we have an opportunity. You have till July 1st to submit your concerns, your cost concerns, your frustration, and in part your anger. And I will hand deliver that to the insurance commissioner. So if people can go to my website, Senator Huang, HWANG.com, we have a splash page that'll link you right to the insurance department, or you can send me an email, and I promise you I will deliver that, hand deliver that on Friday afternoon to the insurance department so your voice gets heard. Anything to say no more increases, it's unsustainable and unaffordable.
Now, Tony, speaking of July 1st, if we don't have a budget and Governor Malloy is able to do an executive order and run the state, how long does that last before legislators go back to work and try to figure out a budget?
There is no timetable,
Okay.
and that is the limbo. The governor's executive order could last for a whole year. And the real challenge is, come July, come August, you could probably get away with it because there's just a summer lull. But come September 1st, schools begin their budgets. Actions and requirement and bond payments all kick into effect. The wheels of government doesn't stop because we didn't do our job. People's lives that are in need of these critical services don't stop because we didn't do our job. The only answer I have, let's get back and do our job. You know, let's reach a deal where we respect that we can no longer tax and spend, and that we need to instill discipline. And let's vote on contracts. Let's enforce a spending cap. Let's show Wall Street. Let's show Main Street that we actually are listening loud and clear that we have to make a change.
Is this crisis going to be enough to drive change in Hartford? You're there every day. We've said earlier in this show that things need to change. You've talked about a systemic look at healthcare. Are we at the point where people are ready for a systemic look at how the state of Connecticut, the government, does business?
I hope we've learned the lesson, but unfortunately, as we've seen in not having a budget vote this before July 1st, shows that we still have a ways to go. Because here's the problem. Unless government and the legislative leaders see the light and are willing to make the difficult decisions to show that we can lead, the people will make the decision by leaving our state. And that is not only a loss of tax revenue, the loss of intellectual capital, the loss of the richness of what our community is all about, and the loss of being able to maintain our Yankee roots of thriftiness, but also social responsibility. Those all get lost. So we have to act. And this is a moment in time where we will be defined, I believe, whether we do it or we don't. And I hope we do. But the challenge is, we have the perfect setting to say to the world, let's make a change. When we were working with GE to try to keep them in our state, you know, the GE executive said to me, and it floored me, that they were looking at Rhode Island in addition to Massachusetts, because Rhode Island, through their governor, through a supermajority Democrat legislature, made pension reform changes, maintained tax stability, created a better partnership and deregulation to help businesses grow. Within a span of less than a year, GE was willing to consider it. And it wasn't just talk, because after GE made the announcement, 3 to 4 months later, they were adding 200 plus jobs in a brand new digital technology business in Providence. We in Connecticut have an embarrassment of riches, workforce, weather, geographic to Boston, New York. We don't need a lot to make that pivot turn, but we need to start showing that we have the commitment and the resolve and leadership to do so. And I'm encouraged. Call me the president of the Optimist Club. But the reality is, I love this state. And I want to be the world's most inexpensive babysitter for my children, because I want them to live here, raise their family here, and contribute to the richness of the state. And you know what? I'm willing to fight for it.
And speaking of fighting for it, Tony, the governor's race is wide open right now on both sides. We've asked you before if you would ever consider potentially running as a Republican. Have you made any decisions on that front?
No, I'm so involved in the budget with fighting the insurance rate increases, fighting against the expansion of gambling, and representing the people of the 28th. There's still business to be done, but I have an exploratory. And one of the exploratory benefits has been that I've been able to go to Eastern Connecticut, to Northwest, to visit our cities, to really understand, even though our differences are significant, and character and personalities and settings are different, people all want what's best for their loved ones and their family, and to have a sense of stability. We solve that problem as a legislative body. We're doing a part of our job. So for me, the exploratory has been an enriching experience to learn and listen to people. We never say no, but at the same time, we should never look ahead for a job that we may or may not have, but rather let's focus on the job we have, and that's my first and foremost priority. And it's a job that I love. You know, we put in some incredible hours, incredible pressure, thousands of emails, but I said to my colleagues, and I said to public, it's the greatest privilege I have, other than being a parent and being a husband. The fact is, I get to represent people and have a say. And that's something that I will never, ever complain about.
Well, Tony, we could always talk to you for hours, but
you're very
unfortunately I
kind.
think we have to wrap it
Yeah.
up. But as always, thank you so much for joining us and kind of going through the budget process from your perspective as a legislator. I think it's really important, and we hope to have you back soon. Maybe when you decide on any big announcement, or, you know, we'll see.
Well, let's hope the big announcement is we have a budget,
budget.
that protects and ensures that we have vitality and viability moving forward. But at the end of that, there is nothing more important, because we need to ensure that the service and deliveries to the citizen of the state, and particularly those most at risk and vulnerable, are protected.
All right, State Senator Tony Wong, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to wrap things up here on CT Pulse. Coming up at 2 o'clock, Nutmeg Sports, and if you missed any of the show, you can watch it on demand at han.network. We'll see you next time.